Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to GSMA DXAF's virtual seminar on Shape of Future 6G Networks and Services. It's great to see you again. The last webinar was about just over 2 months ago. And this webinar, unlike the previous one, which was on AI, this webinar will concentrate on the topic of 6G networks and services. Now, the background to having this webinar is because the DXAF community is working very closely with GSMA's research and consulting arm, GSMA Intelligence, and we're actually working together to maximize the benefits in terms of research and insights that we provide for our members. And this is a test trial to see how much more we can bring about value to our existing members of the DXAF community. So why on 6G? Now, as I explained in the previous, in the introductory invitations, in GSMA MWC Barcelona, there was a lot about AI and all other topics, but very little on 6G. So this, for this webinar, my colleague Peter Jarrett and Tim Hatt will actually share our vision, just review what was covered in MWC Barcelona, and then in the panel discussion goes deep into the topics and issues related to 6G and how 6G may you could say develop over the next couple of years. So that said, I'd like to actually introduce the first presenter for the first presentation. The title will be on MWC 25 in review. What happened and what should we do about it? And this presentation will be done by Peter Jarrett, head of GSMA Intelligence from GSMA. So Peter, over to you.
Thanks, John, and thanks everyone for joining today. It's always a pleasure to support this. I think it's a great opportunity to connect on really important topics. So I think as John mentioned, the last of these webinars was a couple months ago, and since then, obviously, we've had a big event, right? We've had MWC take place, and so what we want to do is kick this off a bit with a discussion of what we saw at MWC. And then lead into the discussion, and my colleague Tim Hatt will be leading a conversation around 6G, in large part because I think what John called out didn't see as much of a conversation about 6G at MWC as you might have expected. But since obviously all these pieces are connected, it is important to understand sort of what did happen at MWC. So I'm just going to run through these slides and then hand over to some more discussion on 6G. So for those of you who don't know who GSMA Intelligence is, John called it out. We're the research and consulting arm of the GSMA. I won't spend too much time on this. This is not a sales pitch, but hopefully a lot of you know who we are. You know the data that we have, as well as the research and the analysts. If not, and particularly if any of the insights shared today in this initial part seem interesting, please reach out. We really work closely with folks. I think a lot of you probably spend a lot of money on research firms, and we're a resource that hopefully you're tapping already or should be tapping some more. So if you looked at MWC, if you were at MWC, you recognize this. If you were following what took place, you probably know these numbers. But needless to say, MWC 2025 was a big event, right? The headline numbers with 109,000 people attending, huge. More than half of the attendees from outside the mobile ecosystem, which is great, showing the impact of mobile on everything else. Lots and lots of content, right? So I think that anyone who was there, who watched from afar, knows how big the event was. But the question is, what came out of it and what's important? And this is something that we did last year. So this is not the data from this year, but I show this because a lot of times we get questions of, you're doing an MWC review, why? Like why do these reviews in the same way of like, why look at trends over across the year at the end of the year? And for us, I think what's important when we look at something like MWC, and it's not just because we're the research and consulting arm of the GSMA, but it's because big events like this, when you bring the whole ecosystem together, they tell us what the ecosystem is looking at. What do your customers, what do your competitors, what do the stakeholders in the ecosystem care about, right? What are they talking about? What's important to them? And this is what we did from last year, and I'll share the details from this year going forward. But we started also looking at what operators we're talking about. right? What do operators think are important? What was their messaging around? What did they show in their booths? What did they announce? Who were they working with, right? And you saw this was from last year. AI, B2B services topped it, then things like 5G and 5G Advanced. Question is, of course, what was big this year? And that's what we're here to talk about. So if you looked at the show, you might know there were a handful of themes, right? And so what we want to do is align sort of what we thought was important. And obviously there's a lot that took place within each one of these topics, right? Tons and tons of details around every single one of them. But what we want to do and what we did is take a look at these themes and say, what do we think are the most important things within each of them? And really, what does that mean broadly to everyone? So we've got about 15 minutes. I'm going to try and go through all of these. As I mentioned, happy to talk afterwards, happy to follow up on any of these. That's what we're here for. So 5G inside, right? The big question here was 5G Advanced. We went into the show thinking 5G Advanced was going to be a big topic. And yes, it got a mention in most booths. There was a handful of announcements, but it wasn't as big as we expected, right? When we talk to operators, and this is from work that we do every year with operators, and we go out and we ask them about their technology trends and their technology plans, we see a big, aggressive, optimistic view about how quickly they'll launch 5G Advanced. But mostly what we saw was we saw a lot of attention from China, not much else, right? So the question is, how are we going to see the deployment taking place this year? What is next year going to look like? Now, the reality is for vendors, for the ecosystem, we need to obviously moderate those expectations, how quickly this can take place, but also look for some cool greenfield opportunities. Right? We know there's still markets where 5G hasn't launched, 5G spectrum is being allocated. Those are great opportunities to see what we can do with 5G Advanced. The other thing, although we didn't see as much on the 5G Advanced side of things, SA and slicing definitely seem to continue to sort of push forward in terms of momentum, right? We all know standalone hasn't deployed as fast as expected. And we also know that when we talk to operators, they expected that they were going to launch it much faster than they did, right? So this is all, not new news, right? We know SA has gone slowly. We know that's impacted things like slicing. But this year, we started seeing a lot more focus on things like slicing, things like quality on demand APIs, and a lot of this being connected to things like public safety, right? There were some great public safety launches, how we saw slicing for critical communications. So we're beginning to see those things come together. SA launching, SA getting more and more momentum, what you do with it, things like slicing, and actual use cases. Obviously, the ecosystem needs to continue to sell what the value is there, but also look for these cool stories, right? Things like we saw. The number of times I talked to people about SA and they said, yeah, it's great. We can do things with slicing. Did you see the stuff with public safety, with critical communications? Those stories resonate. They help to sell the value and also drive forward what we can do with these technologies. AI Plus was obviously probably one of the most important topics of the show. And for the second year in a row, AI dominated what we were talking about. But here, right, this agents was the really new story. Agents, agentic AI, you couldn't get anywhere, right? Gen AI was the discussion for the last few years. Agentic AI was the one this year, right? Last year, everyone sort of magically had deep AI integration in terms of everything they did. This year, everyone had agents, right? But what was interesting is we began to see this focus on sort of networks for AI and AI for networks. And I think we all sort of understand this. And the AI for network side of things, how we use AI to support networks, that again was dominated by the agentic side of things. Now we're going to flip that and talk a bit about the other side in just a second. But it's important to think about really what we mean by agents, right? Agents as just something that actually takes action for you, which if we look traditionally, it's kind of also about automation. And so from an ecosystem perspective, and I heard a lot of people talking about this as well, it's really just automation on steroids, or it's RPA, robotic process automation on steroids. So from an ecosystem standpoint, we need to think about from agentic AIs, how do we position this as automation 2.0, sort of dumbing it down, making it sound like, look, here's why this is valuable, because people understand the value of automation. Operators get that. But also focus on those ecosystems, because one agent alone isn't going to be enough. You have to tie these together. That said, and when we look at what's important, the networks for AI side of things was really the bigger shift in thinking. And we've been talking about this for at least a year or so, right? But we know how AI can support networks. The question is, what can operators do? How can their networks support AI, right? And why is that important? Because it's a huge opportunity for operators, huge opportunity for them to take their assets, support what we know is going to be critical across all industries. Now, we don't necessarily see operators focused on that totally, right? If you look at the work that we do with operators, we ask them, what do you think will be the biggest impact on your networks from things like generative AI? They don't see the traffic being that big of a deal. But what was good then was that we saw at MWC a lot of focus there, right? We saw people talking about edge AI, about AI RAN, about new data architectures. How do you use your transport network to better support AI? Home gateways with AI built them. We see the industry, the operators looking at how they can support AI, and that's critical because that's a huge new monetization opportunity if we get it right. It also ties into things like 5G Advanced, and we need to make that story, but also connect it to what we're doing with AI for networks. Connect X and Enterprise Reinvented. We put these two together because they're somewhat similar in focus. And so I'm going to follow on from what I just mentioned in terms of Edge AI, right? Edge AI obviously was a big part of the story. Distributed AI, how we push AI processing towards the edge. And I think what was interesting is this then really infused into the discussion of private networks and kept that story sort of realistic. We've been talking about private networks for years, and it's always difficult to sort of say, well, what's new and why should you care now? And the edge AI side of things really played that up. Now I'm showing here something from the ZTE booth because I think it was a really good example. When you talk about edge AI, people are like, well, I mean, are we there yet? Do we really need it? They kind of don't see the value. But what I thought was interesting is when you boil this down to an interesting story, people get it. And the story here was, we all know DeepSeek took off over the last year, really since the beginning of the year. And what we've seen is that if you look at markets like China, where it's being used a lot, its performance is being stretched. So what have we seen, right? We've seen a number of vendors, ZTE had it in its booth, basically selling DeepSeek in a box, a server that, well, you've got everything you need, deploy it on-prem. But on-prem DeepSeek is essentially distributed AI, right? And how do you connect that to your private network? You connect that into your private network, and there you go. And right, you tell stories like this, and people get it, right? And they see sort of how, as much as it might seem futuristic or we don't need it, we're getting there. You see how it ties to things like private networks if we can deliver that as a solution, right? Because you can't just sell that server. You got to sell it tied into the private network. You've got to leverage that with partners and help people understand what that all plays together and how that all comes together for a solution. The other side of ConnectX that we looked at a lot was RedCap, right? I don't need to tell you all about RedCap and why it's important. We started seeing probably 2 years ago the interest in RedCap as 5G Advanced came around. And the interest from the ecosystem is huge, right? And you saw that, right? Lots of modules being announced, lots of devices being announced, right? And that's critical because devices are always the gating factor. Now, there was some concerns about this transition to eRedCap and how quickly we're going to move on RedCap versus eRedCap, and does that push things out? Also, some questions about the embedded base of LTE and what we can do with LTE. So it's not a slam dunk, right? But if we look out at the market, we see deployments in most regions. We see a lot of interest. And we also see a tie into things like eSIM, which is really interesting, right? How do we sell that whole solution? So we're beginning to see this momentum bubble up around RedCap. Now we need to prove out some of those performance claims, right? How does it perform compared to what's required? What do the costs look like? But most importantly, as I mentioned, when we think about those solutions, when we think about modules and devices, that's great, but the whole solution needs to be there, pulling in more parts of the ecosystem. We need to be looking at that solution selling. Game changers. This was a theme that kind of means a lot of different things, right? So from us, we looked at a few things here which we thought was important, right? NTN. Obviously, NTN continues to be a big focus, looking at satellite with the direct-to-device side of things, changing things up. Now, circa 2025, most operators of any size have some sort of tie-up with a satellite player. That's great, right? Second part of the solution, we see the device and silicon support coming there. It's mostly on that D2C side, but you're seeing some RedCap, you're seeing some IoT support. What we saw here is sort of a big recognition of what's going to take place, though, is a recognition that there's going to be a lot of phasing, right? Phasing in terms of availability, in terms of capabilities. We're not going to be talking about 24/7 networks from day one, talking about all capabilities, but a recognition that we're going to be phasing in these capabilities to get to where we want to be over the next few years. At the same time, we saw much more of a tie into resiliency, right? How do we look at satellite NTN networks as part of building resilient networks, recognizing that whether it's Whether it's geopolitical concerns, whether it's natural disaster concerns, we need to focus more on resilience, right? The other side of things of game changers that I think we particularly saw was sort of this quantum compute focus. Now, we know quantum compute has been bubbling up for a number of years. No different here at MWC 2025. We saw a lot of focus on what could be done with quantum. What was interesting, though, is sort of focus on both the offense and the defense, right? So on the defense side of things, we get it, right? How do we think about preparing for post-quantum crypto needs? This is not new, right? We've been talking about this for years, getting ready for when quantum makes our networks something that we need to be able to prepare for, right? At the same time, what was interesting this year on the offense side of things, we saw some new monetization opportunities. How do we look at this for crypto? How do we look at this for other applications? How do we look at how this supports various things, and we see tie-ins to AI? Now, of course, there's a big question of, will hyperscalers steal the show? Will hyperscalers get most of the momentum? But what's interesting is the conversation continues, and it's expanded beyond this sort of defensive side of things to actually looking at how we could potentially use things like quantum. Now, of course, from an ecosystem standpoint, as always, we need to be thinking about outcomes and not just technologies. And as I mentioned, thinking beyond security, right? The industry always gets a bad rap for focusing on technology for the sake of technologies. Figuring out how we look at solutions, figuring out how we think about more than just the defensive side of things will be critical. Digital DNA is the last that we'll be talking about here. And I think, in terms of themes there, not too surprising, sustainability continues to be a focus for the industry. But what is interesting is, beyond this just being something around sustainability and energy efficiency, which we've been talking about for years, the conversation is moving beyond energy efficiency. And this is some work that we did with some partners. We launched at MWC around a green network index. And what it recognizes is that as we think about sustainability, there's a number of factors that go into it for operators. Yes, energy efficiency is part of it, but so is use of renewables. So is the impact on network performance. So is the vertical enablement effect. How do we look at what can be done and how we can actually support other industries to be more energy efficient, right? So energy efficiency still matters, but what's critical here and was really great is that we saw the market recognizing that sustainability is more than energy efficiency, right? We're still not hearing a lot of the enablement story. We think that could be done better, but there is a recognition that this is particularly important. Now, hopefully, and I think when we think about going forward, what needs to be done, we need to see more momentum outside the US and Europe. Those markets tend to be leading, right? So I think we could see more momentum in other markets. I think all of you on this call can do your part to help us with that. At the same time, sort of playing up sort of what we're seeing, not just on the efficiency side of things in terms of hardware, but hardware and software. And lastly, I think what we don't see a lot of, particularly from every single region, is a focus on virtual power plants. Huge opportunities there. As we're upgrading our power infrastructure to look at new opportunities there, how do we leverage that for the sustainability of the whole ecosystem? And we've done some work on that. Happy to help any of you and talk with you about what we're seeing there. Last, digital DNA, sort of APIs and AI, right? So I think skills we know is a focus, right? And from a skills discussion at MWC, it was teaching people around upskilling in terms of AI, upskilling in terms of APIs, and that's great, right? Because when we look at telco AI and we look at the challenges, yeah, skills are towards the top. We get that, right? So it was good to see that at MWC, a focus on skills. Hopefully some of you made it to the talent arena. It was a big focus, but beyond that, didn't necessarily see a lot. Not a lot of focus on telco IT and OT skills, not necessarily a lot of focus on what could be taking place in terms of how we're actually using redundant skills as AI takes over. So still a lot of work to be done. It was a great discussion, but we need to continue what we're doing on the AI and API front, but extend that. So last few things, lightning round, I'm going to hit this in the last sort of minute or two that I have left. I mentioned that we've been looking at what operators were talking about. So probably not too surprising if you look at that, what were operators talking about that? AI, digital industries dominated it. And then there was a little bit of a 6G and 5G advance, more on the 5G than 5G advance and 6G side of things, but clearly important to them. We break this into a major focus, medium focus, or limited focus based on what they had in their booths, based on what they announced. Things like Open RAN, private networks towards the bottom, not necessarily as much of a story for operators as it was for the rest of the ecosystem. Lots of room to be done there. On the Open RAN front, because I know it's a big focus, and particularly in markets like APAC, we see a lot of interesting things taking place. We get this question, right? Maybe why wasn't it such a focus, right? And from our perspective, we look at this when we look at the work we do with operators, and we ask them, thinking forward to things like 6G, how do open networking technologies fit in? And what do we see? They expect it to be built in. And so I think as part of our conversations as well, what did we hear when we talked to Open RAN players? We said, yeah, I mean, we don't necessarily market around Open RAN. People just know it's there. So I think there is a bit of an expectation that, particularly as we move forward to 6G, solutions are just becoming more open. Maybe there's just a bit of an expectation of this is how we're building networks going forward, whether we call it Open RAN or not. Network APIs, obviously a big focus. I mentioned that on the skill side of things. Hopefully, you all know what's taking place. You're involved in it. You're leveraging them. Obviously, a lot of interest. The one thing we would caution is that we heard a lot of people talking about patience, right? Well, we need to wait and see how this plays out. Slow burn. It's going to take a while for some of this to pay off. That's a bit of a worry, right? There's no time for patience here. We need to show the examples of what we can do with these APIs, get some good examples, get the monetization out there. Last big picture before I sign off and hand off to the rest of the 6G conversation. I think there were three things that we really sort of, when we think about the big themes, and you come away with going, okay, as we think about what MWC says for telco in 2025, what are the big themes? Trump 2.0 on everyone's lips, right? We heard the discussions of tariffs. We've seen what's happened since then. We know the focus on geopolitical tensions were sort of inescapable. And you saw this reflected in things like a focus on resilience, on security and defense, on supply chains. I think we're seeing the impact. We heard it there. We continue to see it play out. That's going to dominate the discussion for 2025 across all industries, telecom in particular. AI, I don't need to mention that enough. That was a big deal in 2024. It will be this year. Big difference here, I think, is going to start to see a lot of focus on that monetization side of things, the networks for AI, how we actually leverage AI to make money and not just have AI supporting networks. Last, and this is the lead in, I think, to the next part of the conversation, is this 5G to 6G malaise, right? We sort of can't stop this train of where we're going with 6G, and we don't want to. We know it will be important, but a lot of operators, I think, were saying, look, we need to figure out what to do with 5G, make a return on those investments, and figure out how do we bridge that transition. And I think for me, that's a great transition then to the next part of the discussion. Looking forward to it. I'm going to hand it over back to you, John, and my colleague Tim later on for the panel discussion. So thank you all very much. And please reach out to discuss any of this. As John said, we're here to support you all and hopefully help with sharing some more research. So thank you all.
Thanks, Peter. Great. Thanks for a great presentation. It's good to see that you've actually laid out the foundation by covering all the topics that actually work together to create a 6G ecosystem further down the track. So that said, I'd like to actually invite Albert Curley, who's a partner at Altman and Solomon, responsible for their telecoms and media and technology practice. The presentation will be on MWC 25 and beyond, strategy for the 6G era. So Arpad, over to you.
Thank you, John. Can everyone see my presentation?
Yes, you may want to maximize it. Okay.
Yeah, there's a bit lag. Just bear with me with all these various apps. Okay. So again, thank you, John. And also it's a pleasure to be part of this webinar, also given the opportunity to speak a bit about what was presented at MWC. We're not going to repeat what Peter spoke about. Will be a bit of recap, but then also looking beyond that. I'm cautious about time because I have up to 4:30 Singapore time, so I will try to fast track certain slides. But we will today cover three topics. One is obviously trends defining the future of 6G and why. Beyond that, what actually is driving traction and what have we seen thus far, what we expect to see throughout 25 and also 2026, and then a bit about strategy for the 6G era. As I said, being cautious of time, so I'm not going to speak too much about the topics. A bit of recap of what you said, Peter. Obviously, there was a few teams shaping MWC 25. the takeaways that we have, or specifically I have, is obviously AI, which is good because it's about time that our industry is driving more adoption and more focus, and therefore also investments into AI technology, predominantly on network. We also saw, obviously, as Peter mentioned, edge AI and more focus, more investment into compute. Despite our recent slowdown, we're still very positive that we drive future demand and also be a segue into a need of 6G. Last, but yet, in my opinion, one of the most important topics that also shaping the need of 6G and the path to 6G is network commercialization. So there's a huge focus on network commercialization, network exposed APIs, but we're also driven by the fact that we see this fragmentation shaping taking place in the enterprise sector, where at least what we're calling it a hyper verticalization, where we going from the traditional sectors into more modern sectors, which obviously creates a huge headroom of network offerings, network services, which obviously puts an expectation and demand on 6G. Now, with that, what do we see being levers or key focus topics for 6G? We have categorized those into three. So one is ROI. There's need to be a ROI-driven evolution opposed to what we saw 5G. So I'm referring a bit 2G to 4G. So we expect to see that evolution. Obviously, that's also a conversation topic within the ecosystem. The second is further tap on verticalization and enterprise. It's need to be a vertical first and platform-based technology, opposed to 5G that came in with a huge expectation of 5G consumer play, and then obviously that didn't really pick up, apart from FWA that Peter also highlighted, and it's pivoted more and more to enterprise. And then last, obviously, it's a continuation on AI. So I'm not going to continue this. Everyone who's interested to get the content can reach out to me, and I'm happy to share the deck post this session. Now, a bit in terms of what ROI means, and why that is important. It's pretty much driven from a two component prong. One is the feature sets. The feature sets itself for 6G is expecting to drive a incremental demand on better technology, faster technology, but also more importantly, more resilient technology than what 5G standalone is. The second is the value uplift. Now, referring to what I just said before, there wasn't as much of an uplift from the value of 5G. I'm referring to shareholder or value creation to the telcos, but also top line. So that obviously needs to change and be in place when we start to pick up traction and discussions about 6G beyond what we saw at MWC 25. Moving to vertical first and platform-based approach or level, what does that actually translate to? It's simply what we have seen thus far, but it will drive a stronger, or at least what we expect and from the conversation we have with the telcos, but also other places within the ecosystem. Obviously, one, and I've had a chance to meet 60 Forum in Korea last week. Forums like 6G here in Korea is driving obviously a more advocacy of why 6G is important from a vertical or from a enterprise and vertical perspective. I'm not going to walk it through because I'm also aware about the time because the panel is half an hour and I don't want that to run over time. So I'm going to skip to the next slide, which is AI. What we expect here is a doubling down on hyper focus or hyper localized edge AI, and with that compute, which would require a technology like 6G opposed to what 5G is offering. Those are the three levers that we expect to drive a increased demand on 6G vis-a-vis why only 5G. I will step into what are the three demand drivers. Obviously, we see six demand drivers here. Telco cost pressures, obviously, is an increased pressure on optimizing cost and pretty much doing more for less CapEx. AI use cases and AI adoption across the entire value chain, a value pool of a telco, edge computing, platform readiness for B2B and enterprises, but then also continued pent-up demand or pent-up consumption of data, specifically in dense urban areas, specifically in APAC and Southeast Asia, where we have seen a continuous pent-up consumption of data, where also that's going to require a 6G investment or 5G. And then policy. The last slide is on strategy. So what are the different strategies that can be adopted? Are we doubling down on programming networks, Open RAN, and AI? So we see that being the key drives and key pushes for why we need to intensify discussion about 6G. I'm 1 minute over time, and obviously I fast-tracked this presentation given I only had 10 minutes. But I will pause there and stop there and pass it over to you, John.
Thanks, Arpad. Okay, appreciate you keeping to time. Ladies and gentlemen out there, all the community members, we are actually trying to fit in a lot of content within a limited time. You'll be able to access the slide and the content from Arpad's presentation after this webinar. So please reach out if you'd like a copy. All right, that said, thank you again, Arpad. And that said, let's move on to the panel discussion session. And this is going to be around the theme of what major 6G related topics and issues are anticipated to dominate discussions in 2025. The moderator of this session will be Tim Hatt, a colleague of mine. He's the head of research and consulting at GSMA Intelligence. We actually have 5 panel discussants here, all the executives. We have Itsuma Tanaka, who's a president and CEO of Docomo Communications Laboratories Europe. We have Bo Hagemann, Director of Advanced Technologies from APAC from Ericsson. We have Juho Lee, Head of Samsung 3GPP Operations from Samsung Electronics and Research Center. We have Professor Kyung-hee Chang, Executive Community Chair and Head of 6G Forum. And we have Soma Velayutham, apologies, Soma, who's a Vice President of AI and Telecoms at NVIDIA. That said, Tim Hatt, over to you.
Thank you very much, John. It's great to be here, and thanks to all our great panelists here. So I think, Peter and Arpad have teed up the discussion really well, and we've set up the panel. We've got about half an hour, just under half an hour, and sort of 4 components to it. We're going to start with sort of 6G vision, big picture stuff. We're then going to get into sort of use cases and what it goes beyond 5G for. We'll look at the implications for data traffic, and then finally sort of how this is all positioned to consumers and businesses from a marketing perspective and standards as well. So I think, maybe Professor Chang, I can start with you. You've got a purview across a lot of what's happening with 6G. Beyond the discussion of technology, what does 6G mean to you, and what do you think we want it to do?
Thanks for asking. First of all, I'd like to share a little bit the situation in Korea. In Korea, 5G data consumptions per smartphone has been increased around a little bit less than 5 times, for exactly 4.4 times from the 4G in Korea. But almost all the data increase comes from the best after service. So that means those kind of the data increase not really helpful to the profitability of the MNO's business model. And then there are several reasons. Sometimes we refer that as the 5G lessons. But for the 6G, I think the data rate increase that has played a significant role in the growth of the mobile communications business so far is no longer sustainable. So it may be necessary to shift gears to improve the profitability of the business model, especially for the MNOs. And then alternatives may be including the use of the AI to enhance the autonomy, or something like holographic communications. But these do not seem certain in the aspects of the increasing data rate. So that is the business model to increase the profitability of the MNO and to decrease the total cost of ownership, including the CAPEX and OPEX, might be mandatory for the 6G mobile communications. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. I think, your point around the traffic is very pertinent. We'll come to that. Itsumu, maybe I can come to you next. From Docomo's perspective, do you think 6G is more about the technology transition, or is it more of a business transformation, or both? How do you think about that?
Yeah, thanks. Actually it's much bigger than just technology evolution. That's how we see it. 6G to us is something that solves a lot of problems in our society today. Well, actually, the world is full of problems today, right? The economy is a big mess today. The telecom business struggles, as we saw in the previous presentation. Society, sustainability, security, defense, a lot of things come into play. And as a telecom operator, we see 6G as a very important tool to create the resilient and globally unified infrastructure, and of course, with a strong business case that answers our management questions, the business questions. And so, so most importantly, so we think 6G is much bigger than just technology, but it's a really opportunity. It's really an opportunity to review what we have today and what we want to have in the future, and have something unified around the globe. So that's our take. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think there's probably consensus around it being more than technology, and it's perhaps a paradigm shift in terms of how, mobile technology should work. Juho, maybe I can get your perspective from Samsung, from a device maker. How do you think about this question? If it's, if it is going beyond technology, what should we expect?
That is a good question. Actually, very much related to the kind of bigger question whether whole industry can survive or not. I mean, for 5G, there was much emphasis on incubating new vertical sectors. But now what we are feeling is that we have to go back to basic, which is basically consumer devices. If we just stick to smartphone type devices, it may not give us a bright future in the going forward. So we really need to have new devices that can attract many consumers so that they can have new experiences and they are happy to pay for new devices. That is the most important thing in our view. And of course, then industry also has to continue to further have the vertical sectors like industrial IoT devices and NTN, all different things. And of course, utilizing AI is another possibility. But anyway, in our view, it is really important to have new appealing consumer devices.
Well, I think that's a good overview. I wanna bring in Bo and Soma to start the next section. So when we think about, and Bo, I'll come to you first. I mean, when we think about the capabilities that 6G brings, how do you link those to the new use cases that will be available? And whether it's talking about AI or security or energy efficiency, I mean, which of those attributes do you think will be most important from a business model perspective, not just a technology perspective, but in terms of what 6G is able to do that 5G can't?
Thank you for the question. And starting actually in the other end, thinking about how should it be used in the networks, because to having these kind of settings, we should remember that technology, of course, will be supporting the business. So from that perspective, and then we do see the exposure and how that will be playing around. So differentiation and those kind of things for the new type of services. And if we have an expectation on 6G, it should then, of course, both extend, enhance, and evolve what is actually are in 5G. So it's really need to be there. And then it's also very much about new use cases. And from that perspective, we also will see that the network will be kind of a kind of federation of data. We have all these kind of new features that is talked about and so forth. But to be able to do this, of course, spectrum and other assets needs to be in place. And I think that is the most important part that we talk about. But back to it, it's the business and the new type of services that need to be done. And if we look at it from the perspective, how it really be. And from that perspective as well, looking at the time, technology time cycles, we know that, for example, in 5G now, it's quite early in the stage. We know that the 5G will be largest in 27, most likely peak in 32. But if you then think about launching 6G, then it will likely be in 2030. It will likely be peaking around 2043 or so. So from that perspective, I think we have to have that in mindset. Thank you.
And thank you.
So I'd like to get your view. NVIDIA is involved in so many things right now, and is really at the top of the AI movement. Looking ahead to 6G, what advancements are you most excited about?
Yeah, thank you, Tim. So, as previous speakers and the presentation earlier, there are, at every point in time, every generation, there's been different kind of traffic that dominated networks. 2G was probably digital voice, 3G, 4G was internet, and then you had mobile video, and so on, right? So we believe the dominant traffic of the next era, either 5G advanced and 6G, is actually AI. AI is going to be the dominant traffic. And if AI is going to be the dominant traffic, even today, if you look at number of times we do ChatGPT on our phone, number of times we do, image creation, or do, I use Perplexity and ChatGPT very often on my phone, for all my questions and Copilot. So that traffic is going to be very dominant, the generative AI and agentic AI. And then add to that, you have agentic AI coming in enterprises as well. So how do we build the network, as the presenter alluded? How do we build a network for AI is key, right? And if we understand that AI and agentic AI and generative AI is going to be the dominant workload on our networks, how do we build a network for that? So that will be the key. It has to be efficient, it has to be secure, and it has to meet the latency and deterministic requirements of this. What we found out, and as we, I know in telecoms, we tend to glorify the latency and edge. We tend to say that the reason for edge tends to be latency. But reality is, if you run an agentic AI application, a conversational AI, if you're talking to an avatar, 2 seconds or about 1.5 seconds to 2 seconds is good enough to have a meaningful conversation, good quality. A network latency is usually like 50 milliseconds, a round trip delay. You don't need any, networks today can deliver that very well. So if you look at the ratio between the current network latency and the requirements of the AI agents or AI applications, the dominant latency is still in the compute and applications, right? It's not in the network. However, where networks can truly add value is the determinism of that latency, the determinism of the quality. If I say I need to have 2 milliseconds or 2 seconds and at every time, and I want it, and I should get it. So having this 5G SA is actually a nice build-up, because 5G SA now guarantees this. It enables the CUPS architecture and offload and deliver it at the edge. So in summary, the AI traffic will dominate the networks of the future, and the value delivered by the network, the easiest one that we tend to lean on to is latency, but it's going to be much more than latency. It's going to be about determinism, and it's going to be about slicing and quality of service.
Got it. Message received. Yeah, and I think there's no question that the AI impact will be, significant in many ways. I think a lot of that will come down to how it's embedded in the standards to change the way the network works compared to now. But you're right, it's in the 5G advanced is sort of the seeds. Itsuma, I wanted to come back to you before we go to the next section. I mean, when we've talked a lot about AI and 6G being kind of native AI, what about other feature sets like energy efficiency or security? Do you think these become key game changers with 6G, or how do you feel about those?
For us, like topics like energy is not 6G question, but that's a question we're facing even today with 5G. And well, I think everybody saw this in Mobile World Congress, a lot of demos, trials, experiments around how we could actually reduce the energy using AI. So AI is still already a big tool, and well, it relates to all of the topics, sustainability, energy, and like slicing management, network management, operations, and then everything. Yeah, so I think everything, a lot of new topics around here, but I think AI is definitely a big thing of today, and that will continue to dominate our discussion about our network evolution.
And Juho, do you want to weigh in on that? Any other attributes that you think are really important moving from 5G to 6G, like security, open networking? Are there any others you would mention or want to highlight beyond AI that we should be thinking about?
From our perspective, energy efficiency is clearly one of the biggest driving factor for developing 6G technologies. The reason is that recently there's a lot ongoing effort to provide network energy efficiency mechanism for network side. But then the existence of legacy devices are always limiting the application of those new technologies, because if we install such new technology for energy saving in the network, then legacy devices will not be able to camp on those networks. So that is basically a big issue, and the industry learned a lot from that experience. And this is big vision that in 6G from day one, we have to have good design which incorporates both network and UE to maximize energy saving on network side. But at the same time, also we have to guarantee battery consumption at the device should be acceptable or should be minimized, so that we can also maximize benefit of end users. And the security aspect, of course, I mean, the cellular networks has been secure. However, there's increasing demand to have further security protection due to, for example, quantum computing and the force space station attack. There are many different threats. Then from day one, we should have very good security measures. That's also very important. And other than that, maybe the experience we got regarding the IoT device support in 5G, we have to make sure that the CSC networks will be kind of common framework for supporting different types of devices, so that we can maximize economies of scale. Having different designs optimized for different IoT devices will be another mistake, so we have to avoid that. I think we can stop. I can stop here. Thank you.
I've got a couple of questions. Professor Cheng, I'm going to come to you next, and then to Bo, around sort of traffic and network strategy, and then we'll move on to an outlook section looking at sort of how this is positioned to customers and what the roadmap looks like. But Professor Cheng, I mean, we've talked a lot about, data traffic has been on a seemingly inexorably rising path for many years. Growth is slowing a bit now. With 6G, though, how should operators think about managing the traffic implications, particularly that arise from AI? I think you're on mute, Professor Cheng.
Okay. So
There you
the actually I like to mention the Devon's paradox first. I think that some of us are already familiar with that. Definitely, I have no doubt at the center of the 6G technology enablers, AI, and then the NTN will be the enablers which make the huge difference from the 5G. And then even though I mentioned the business model of the MNO does not have to solely rely on the data rate increase, but there may be still we have the possibility of data increase, especially aggressively using the AI anyhow. And then if AI works fine, then all of us will try use more and more AIs. So even though we devise some rate to decrease the data rate, aggregate payload from the AI, and then let's say we decrease the data rate a lot, for example, by using the on-device AI, something like that, then people start to use more and more, right? So pretty much believe there will be a more and more use of AI, and then that will result in the data rates increase. But another one already mentioned by the NVIDIA expert, even though we have the huge amount of AI and ML knowledge, but almost all of those knowledges are not especially specific for the networks. For example, anomaly detection and root cause analysis at this current status, the MNOs in almost all the MNOs are using some AI technology for those purposes, but after detecting the anomaly and the root cause, they don't apply those results directly to the network. So definitely we need kind of the AI agent network architecture, and then that will mitigate and then trade the data rate increase, and then that will finally result in the huge increase of the whatever the killer application, something like that. That will be the popular.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, that's helpful. And Bo, can I get your perspective on this from Ericsson's point of view? I mean, how should operators think about network strategy and managing the traffic implications that come from 6G and AI?
Yeah, but if you think about it, AI is quite a lot. It's also about how much the consumers, even enterprises, industries, and whatever coming to be used for. And if we just look at the trends, like the immersive communication type with smart glasses and camera buds and those kind of things coming out, and the predictions, what it will happen. Assume now, for example, that this will take off in the same manner that actually the smartphone did in previously when Apple has released it, and how that actually took off, and see that will be part of it. So combining that also with the AI for kind of personalization, we see that increasing actually the attention and also the attractions overall to use these kind of services. And going further, looking into personalized type of Gen AI with the assistant-based type of video analysis and so forth, having those smart glasses going from the position that we do maybe something, a AR service, to something that is always on, actively on for the AI agent and those kind of things. So looking into those kind of things, then it will be a lot of technical advances. I'm quite convinced of that, given that the data flows will be reduced and so forth. But historically, we actually have seen every time that happens, it gives potential for further to be used by larger population and larger type of consumer bases and so forth. Then we have another area which actually will be happening. Since 6G will be kind of a unified network, it's an all network, including actually the sky, the 3D. We will see also like sensing those kind of features coming in And then we talk about both physical objects and non-physical properties that could be sensed in the networks. And all that data will be federated and fused into the networks, again, together with a kind of environment of other stuff. So back to it, that will actually generate, and I believe we have not seen historically that it has been reduced, the data. Data is actually always been consumed when available. We have to think about where the data is available as well. So from that point of view, if that is in place, innovation will happen, how it will be used, and then you will see different kind of business coming out of it. Thank you.
Isuma, did you want to come back on that?
Can I make a quick comment on this? So on top of just traffic, I think it is also very important that we look at compute resource management as well. A lot of traffic, a lot of data, sensing new types of data, and we need a big processing power to manage our network. But then we need to also see the energy efficiency, the cost balance, and everything. And yeah, so it's a very interesting topic towards 6G, and everything will become more cloud native. So in that aspect, we expect a lot of evolutions around it. Thank you.
Got just 2 minutes left, so 2 lightning round questions here, and if we can keep the answers to under a minute, that would be greatly appreciated before I hand back to John. But Juho, when we talk about the G concept, 4G, 5G, 6G, there's a lot of marketing in that in addition to technology. Do you think we are in a post-G world now, or is 6G is it still important to have that, sort of tag with it?
I would say 6G is still important as a G concept, but then beyond 6G, I'm not sure. Probably beyond 6G, you may just continue very smooth evolution of technologies without generation change. That's what I expect personally.
Yeah, fair enough. And then Soma, maybe lastly to you, and if you can keep the answer brief, what challenge should we be aware of? What do you think the biggest challenge with 6G development is that we should be thinking about?
Yeah, I think if there's one thought I would like to leave is, all the discussion here is valid. But remember, when we build networks are always designed for peak. Just like a power grid, a wireless network is designed for peak. And by that virtue of that, the resource is underutilized a lot of times. And with the technology of tokens, and tokens being a stateless compute utilization, whereas network being a stateful compute utilization, designing a base station that can be highly utilized for RAN when it's stateful, and when it is not used for RAN, can be filled with a stateless tokenization. So being able to find that higher utilization of RAN with workloads that may not necessarily come from the access network, but being able to use that compute functionality is a very important aspect, because for all the 5 generations, RAN has been single purpose, the RAN compute. How can we increase our utilization and ROI in the next generation? That's one thought I would like to leave the audience with.
Yeah, no, it's a good thought. I think ultimately all roads do lead to ROI, and that's a good way to end it. Listen, I know we could talk for hours on this, but as ever, we only have a limited set of time. So thank you, all of you, for joining. That was really good. We covered a lot of ground. I know there are some questions from the audience, which I think John will be able to pass through and we can respond to offline. Apologies, we don't have time to go through them all on the air, but thank you once again. And John, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you very much, Tim, and thank you very much the panelists. It was a very good, interesting discussion. I'm sure I plan to follow it up with additional webinars in the next few months as well. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, just before we close this webinar, I'd like to mention a couple of things. First is that this webinar is recorded, and the presentation materials will be available on our GSMA APAC website. So please let us know. I will actually share the link to this recording and to the slides after this webinar. In closing, I also like to mention that DXAF is in the process of actually putting together, gathering information about DXAF member attendees that will be interested in attending MWC Shanghai. So if you're interested in attending MWC Shanghai, please let us know. I will share an email about this so that we try to actually make the most of it for the members that are attending MWC Shanghai in terms of activities and seminars that they can attend as well. Just in relation to the AI Nexus Advisory Board survey that we conducted at the end of Q1, there's been a slight delay, and apologies for the delay, but the findings of the result will be shared by the end of next week with all the DXF members. And the next webinar, DXF webinar, will be held at the end of June or early July, and this will be around AI this time. But just to refer to what Soma mentioned, it may be very much around the AI RAN or Edge AI, but I'll be able to actually clarify exactly what topic it will be on over the next few weeks as well. But that said, I hope you found the webinar very fruitful and productive and interesting. Please do if you have any questions, email them through, and I will share all the follow-up information and the links to the recording in a follow-up email after this. Once again, thank you very much, and thank you very much to all the panelists and the speakers that participated. Have a great day. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you.